Welcome to this series of pre-scene analysis videos on the August 2019 Management Case Study Pre-Scene from CIMA. And this pre-scene document that we'll be going through in detail over the course of the next 10 videos relates to a company by the name of Cruisecalm, a fictional business. It's a cruise company. And over the course of these 10 videos, we'll be going through each and every section of this 29-page document, talking about the most important issues as they come up and relating them to likely exam issues and theories from your E2, F2 and P2 studies. So without further ado, let's take a look at the opening section of this pre-scene. We're told that Cruisecalm is a quoted company that operates a fleet of holiday cruise ships. It's based in Portaro, which is a major city in the fictional country of Norland. And Portaro offers, we're told, extensive shipping facilities, and it's a major business centre. So the fact that Cruisecalm is a quoted stock exchange listed company means that it has more financing options than a private business. It would have reputational benefits as well that come along with being a publicly listed company. We'll see that they have been a publicly listed company for many decades, in fact, so it's likely they're reputed in their home market. Certainly, we're told later on that they're one of the biggest cruise companies in the world, so a very well-known company. On the other side, there are some disadvantages that come with being a quoted company. There are compliance issues. There's the need to publish quarterly financial statements and have your financial statements audited. And there's pressure, of course, from shareholders to generate a return in the form of profits, which could lead to dividend payouts, and also in terms of share price appreciation. So they have their expectations and are likely to be pressuring senior management at the business to ensure that the company has a route to profitable growth. And in general, when you're a stock exchange listed company, there is lots in the way of public scrutiny. Investment analysts talk about your stock. It's analysed in the financial press, etc., in a way that is not common to private companies. In the next paragraph, we're told that Norland is a developed country with a high standard of living. The average age of the population is quite high, and there are large numbers of people in this country who can afford to indulge in expensive holidays. This is all good news for a business like Cruisecalm, and we will see later that Cruisecalm is actually is concentrated on the high end of the cruise market. They aim for very affluent travellers. So all of this is good news. And in accordance with Porter's Diamond, which you would have come across in E2, it looks like the demand conditions are certainly very favourable. It tends to be older people traditionally who have taken cruises, although that is actually changing a little bit, and we'll talk about that development soon. But generally, it's a more affluent customer that likes to splash out on cruises. And also the factor conditions in accordance with Michael Porter's Diamond look pretty good because we're talking about a port city, a major business centre. It would have a very well developed port with lots and lots of traffic, so it would be very suitable for a shipping business or a cruise company to originate in such a market. Consumers in this country, in Norland, because it's a developed country, are likely to have high spending power. On the other hand, though, wage costs are likely to be higher for a business like Cruisecalm. Their employees would probably predominantly come from the country of Norland, and that would obviously impact on their costs. Norland's currency then is the N dollar, and companies in Norland are required to prepare their financial statements in accordance with international financial reporting standards. So all of that adds to what I was saying earlier, that Cruisecalm would be likely a reputable business. There would be a perception that it has its house in order, and internationally as well, it's likely they would be quite a reputable business, especially if they're coming from a country that is quite onerous regulations. As I said, it's quite trying for a company to adhere to these onerous regulations, but once you do it, it means that investors, employees, business partners, etc., can be quite sure that they're dealing with a well-run business. You yourself then are a financial manager in Cruisecalm's head office. Your primary responsibilities lie in the area of management accounting, and you're dealing with the senior financial manager who reports directly to the finance director. So what's happening here at the MCS is you're moving up through the levels. You're no longer a lowly finance officer as you were at the operational level, dealing with day-to-day activities, short-term issues, not really dealing very often with senior people. Now you are a manager, an overseer, and you have more influence and direct contact with the decision makers at the business. So as a financial manager, your role will entail monitoring the implementation of strategy. So the strategy would be set out by the senior leaders at the company, but they would expect you to oversee its implementation. You will have a midterm focus. At the operational level, your focus would have been very much on the short-term, day-to-day execution of activities. At the strategic level, you'll take a long-term focus, so you'll think of investments, etc., with a long-term horizon of maybe 3 to 5 years, and the midterm focus is somewhere between the two, maybe 1 to 3 year time horizons. You'll be deciding on adequate investments for the business, in which product categories they should be going into, the prices that would be assigned to new products, etc. You'd also have to deal with the risks that come up with entering new product categories, markets, etc., and managing those risks and mitigating those risks well. Because you're dealing about a longer term time horizon, you're going to have to put in place longer term financing as well. And you will be dealing with more advanced financial reporting issues. This business, Cruisecalm, has consolidated financial statements, and that would complicate financial reporting issues. And because you're dealing with the top management at the company, senior managers, finance directors, etc., you will need to influence them. So people and leadership skills are going to carry more marks in this exam than they did in the operational exam. With the operational case study, it was more about demonstrating your technical skills. They count for fewer marks in the management case study, and the business skills, leadership skills, and people skills, the softer skills, account for more. And in line with that, you'd be expected to consider not just your own business and the day-to-day issues affecting the business, but rather the wider environment, thinking of stakeholders such as competitors, regulatory bodies, the wider environment, the place where the company is based, etc. And that's the way you're expected to think, to take a little bit more of a wider view. P2 tends to carry more marks than E2 and F2 at the management case study. So there we're talking about managing costs well, contrasting activity-based costing with traditional forms of absorption costing, for example. Customer profitability analysis would be important at this level. Thinking of Cruisecalm, they will have to segment their market according to different customer types. We've already mentioned the importance, for example, of older customers with a lot of spending power, but increasingly younger families are drawn to cruises. They would have maybe a little bit less in the way of spending power, so that's a different segment, and they might carry with them different profitability expectations. Total quality management, cost of quality, just in time, and theory of constraints would all be important too. We'll talk about quality issues throughout this pre-scene. Long-term profitability, the application of target costing, for example, might be quite useful for Cruisecalm, and analysing the value chain. Then pricing we will talk about in a great detail as well, as this company enacts price differentiation across different types of consumer. So let's take a look at the cruise industry, which is a major part of the global tourism industry. In fact, it accounts for about 3% of total global tourism revenues, although we'll see in a while that it's actually the fastest growing segment of the tourism industry in the leisure travel segment. So we're told that there are approximately 50 cruise lines operating worldwide, and they operate over 3 main categories, which we'll talk about in a second. But just a word on this form of transport. Normally, when we're talking about modes of transport, airplanes, ships, trains, etc., we're talking about something that has increasingly become viewed as a commodity. The CEO of Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, in the early days especially, would repeatedly talk about air travel as a commodity. It's just about getting people from A to B, and he would contrast that to more high-end airlines such as British Airways and the Gulf carriers that charged very, very high prices to transport people, and they would include all sorts of extras. So the Ryanair approach was to just strip away all those extras and to provide the bare minimum and get people from A to B safely. So safety, reliability, punctuality is the order of the day with many modes of transport. And cruise liners are exceptional in the area nowadays of leisure travel, in that it isn't just about getting people from A to B. The journey is the destination, really. People spend most of their time on the cruise liner rather than on land exploring different destinations. So the experience of traveling needs to be enjoyable. So there are 3 main types of cruise. The most important, the biggest one, is ocean cruises, and they're longer journeys. They last for 1 to 2 weeks typically. Every cruise will have an itinerary with a number of stops, maybe 8 to 10 stops on a total circular route. And the ocean cruises, we're told, are generally provided using very large cruise ships. The idea is that they can endure rough seas and that they provide very comfortable accommodation. They're essentially moving hotels. And the second type of cruise is river cruises. They last shorter durations, up to a week, and typically they would stop off at cities along a river route. So we're talking here about intra-country travel rather than inter-country travel, which would be from one country to another. Here we're talking about these river cruises typically taking place within the boundaries of one country. So smaller distances covered, smaller boats being used for these river cruises. And the third type of cruise is specialty cruises. So they take a host of different forms to traditional cruises. They're promoted to a very specific kind of person. You might have an adventure traveler. They're looking for high-risk environments such as the polar oceans. So they're quite extreme environments. They're kind of expedition cruises, and often then the people on these cruises will want to go ashore to take part in adventure activities. And these kinds of specialty cruises, the idea is that they provide the customer with a transformational experience. So they're quite expensive, they're still quite niche, but growing in importance. So this kind of specialty cruise would, in accordance with Michael Porter's generic strategies, which you would have come across in E2, fall under the category of differentiation focus. So they're expensive, but they're targeted on a particular niche, whereas the ocean cruises provided by Cruisecalm, for example, we'll talk about in a while, as falling under the differentiation area. So they've got a broader spectrum of customers that they're drawing from, but certainly they're high end. And the other kind of specialty cruise relates to themed activities, such as literary cruises, where famous authors are invited aboard to give talks about their work, etc. And that is something that a company like Cruisecalm can actually incorporate into its normal day-to-day affairs. And there is mention a little bit later of that kind of activity being provided by Cruisecalm. So as I said, this is a big growth market. It's the fastest growing segment in the travel area, and passenger numbers have grown steadily for the last decade, with 28.4 million passengers confirmed in 2018. And another interesting thing is when you look at the industry, there's discussion of occupancy rates being close to or at 100% across the board. So these ships, when they leave port, are 100% full. That is obviously wonderful news for companies like Cruisecalm. It gives them a huge amount of pricing power because demand outstrips supply. And where you have demand outstripping supply, prices tend to rise. And that's one of the reasons why the pricing power for a company like Cruisecalm is likely to be high. And we will talk about the other issues impacting their pricing power throughout the rest of the pre-scene. But certainly that's one big one. The fact that there is a lot of demand, there's too much demand, in fact, for companies like Cruisecalm. So let's take a look at the evolution of passenger numbers over the last 9 or 10 years. We're presented with this chart where it runs from 2009 all the way through to projections in 2019. We can see that the global passenger numbers stood at about 17 million in 2009 and rose to 28.4 million by 2018. And it looks as if they're set to rise to 30 million almost in 2019. So that represents a compound annual growth rate of 5.9% between 2009 and 2018. So that's over the course of 9 years, with roughly a 5% increase projected for 2019 versus 2018. If we say that it's going to be a rise from 28.4 million to about 30 million, a little bit below, it's about a 5% increase. Worldwide, we're told there are approximately 50 cruise line companies. They operate a total of 480 ships, so that gives an average of about 10 ships per cruise line company. We'll see later that Cruisecalm has 15 ships, so it's a little bit above what you might expect to be the average. Ocean cruises, as we mentioned before, of the 3 types of cruise, are by far the most popular. River cruises and the adventure type specialty cruises are offered by companies that are targeting a niche, although those niches are becoming larger. And they do represent diversification opportunities for a business like Cruisecalm if it wanted to diversify away from its reliance on ocean cruises. It might want to look at acquiring a river cruise business or indeed an adventure type specialty firm. Most of the ocean cruises, we're told, are from 1 to 2 weeks. Passengers fly from their home country to join a cruise at one of its designated port calls. So as I said, there might be 8 to 14 port calls on any 1 to 2 week ocean cruise, and passengers could join at any point. Passengers choose their cruises based on 2 factors. The first is the ports of call, in other words, the destinations that they will be stopping at along the way. And secondly, the facilities being offered by the ship. So, as I said, the destination is obviously one factor, but that's kind of outside the control of the cruise line company. Once the passengers disembark and go explore a city or something, the experience that the passenger has in that city is obviously a little bit outside the influence of the cruise line company. So what the cruise line company primarily influences is the experience on board, the facilities they offer, how smooth the crossing was, etc. And as I said, the journey is as much the holiday as the destination. So the experience of being on board needs to be satisfactory. There needs to be lots of entertainment. Passengers can't be growing bored while they're waiting to arrive at a certain port of call. So that is, of course, under the influence of a cruise line company, and that's what Cruisecalm is in the business of. Of course, they do pick the destinations that they stop off at, but as I said, once the passenger is off board, there isn't a lot that the cruise line company can do to influence the experience that the passenger has once they're on land. So ships make port at least once every 2 days. So in that way, there isn't a lot of waiting between visiting destinations. Ideally, the ship will sail at night so that in the morning, the passengers will be able to disembark and go on land and explore a city or a town. So in that way, there's minimum disruption to the passenger's experience, and the company needs to ensure that there is smooth sailing. So that's why they need particularly large vessels that can endure rough seas. And there need to be lots of entertaining distractions in the form of high quality food options, dining options. There need to be entertainment. There needs to be entertainment in the form of musical shows, etc., swimming pools, and shopping options as well, which we'll talk about in due course. So the customer is then disembarking to go off sightseeing during the day. Every 1 to 2 days they're visiting a new port. So as I said, half of the customer experience is outside the control of Cruisecalm. Shore visits then last between 8 and 12 hours, and by the time the passengers have disembarked, they've gone through passport control, and they might need to take a bus to get to the final destination itself if it's a particularly large port. All of these are logistical issues that would reduce the amount of time the passengers actually get to spend on land. So they represent bottlenecks that affect the overall customer experience. And even though the experience that the customer has on land is outside the experience, the influence of Cruisecalm, it's still going to influence the passenger's overall experience of and feedback to Cruisecalm, because in the passenger's mind, it is all bundled in with the amount that they paid to Cruisecalm. So if they have an unsatisfactory experience going through passport control, etc., taking buses for hours on end to get to the final destination, all of that is going to result in negative feedback for Cruisecalm, and it will be associated with Cruisecalm. So what Cruisecalm needs to do is to take as many of these factors under their own control as they can and try at least to remove as many of these bottlenecks as possible. It might also influence the ports that they do choose to stop off at. If they know that Port A, for example, offers a smooth disembarking experience compared to Port B, where passengers need to queue up and go through passport controls, etc., then they would be wise to choose Port A. Ocean cruise ships, we're told, are designed to make the time spent aboard as relaxing and enjoyable as possible. There are 3 big areas that would impact on the passenger's enjoyment: food, retail, and entertainment. So every cruise company will offer a variety of dining options. There would also be retail options in the form of shops, health and beauty spas, and entertainment then in the form of resident musicians, dancers, and other acts that perform on a daily basis. There would be swimming pools and areas for sunbathing as well. So all of that is set up to ensure that the passengers are not bored and that their crossing is as enjoyable and relaxing as possible. Cruises are priced to take account of the standard of service, the number of shore excursions, and the standard of cabins. So they're the big areas impacting on the price. More expensive cabins tend to have windows and balconies, while the cheaper cabins don't have that exterior view. And talking about price, the big influences on price, really, there are three. First of all, the company obviously needs to cover its own costs and ideally make a profit beyond those costs. Obviously, the price is very much influenced by what the customer is actually willing to pay. That would relate greatly to the demand for the services, the supply, and we've already talked about demand outstripping supply. So that means prices are likely to be higher for cruise services, and the number of competitors in the market and the way that they price. So we've already seen there are about 50 cruise lines worldwide. That isn't a huge number of competitors, and we'll see later on that there are about 6 big competitors, and Cruisecalm is in the big 6, so there's an oligopoly type market setup, and as a firm with a limited number of competitors, Cruisecalm would obviously also have a good deal of pricing power there as well. The fact as well that you have these older passengers that have purchasing power, their kids have left the home, they're retired, they have spending power, they can afford these luxurious cruises being offered by Cruisecalm at the high end. Their price elasticity of demand is likely to be quite low there. In other words, rises in price are not going to cause a huge drop in demand, and that relates to your P2 studies. But consumer tastes are changing. Traditionally, the group that has gone on cruises is the older passenger with a good deal of spending power. They want a peaceful, relaxing experience. That market is still important, but we're told that there is growing demand from younger people, especially younger people with young children. So it's likely that these passengers are more drawn to budget options. And we'll talk about one budget cruise line later on in this pre-scene. There is also a greater emphasis on different kinds of activities rather than just sightseeing, which is more geared towards an older market. The facilities also would change in accordance with the changing demographic of passengers, with basketball courts, climbing walls, and other features being more commonly found now on new cruise liners as they try to entertain younger passengers. The danger maybe there is that it could disrupt the experience that older passengers have. They're looking to relax. If they've got kids and young people running around on basketball courts, etc., shouting and screaming, it's likely to clash with their view of what a cruise should be. So it's important that the cruise line companies segment these markets properly and understand the needs of different passenger segments, market to them effectively, and give them what they want. So in the light of this change in consumer tastes, it may be that upgrades are needed to the ships that Cruisecalm already has. They upgrade their ships quite often, so it wouldn't be surprising to see something come up on exam day where they have to buy some new cruise ships because of this changing demographic shift in their customer base. Pricing is also complicated, we're told. With traditional holidays, it's very simple. The pricing is affected by the choice of destination, the time of year, and the class of hotel or air travel, for example. And often you would have all of this bundled in one offer. It's an all-inclusive offer, and that makes prices very transparent and easily comparable. And that means that travelers typically have a good deal of power and lots of options in terms of the companies that they select. But that's not really the case with cruise line companies. Pricing is more complex in this area. So there are lots and lots of choices. First of all, Passengers are offered different prices based on the itinerary, which can vary greatly. There are significant additional charges once they're on board. They can upgrade to different classes of cabin. There are different dining options which can be changed once they're on board as well, although there is the ability to pre-book lots of activities such as spa treatments, shore excursions, etc. But you have all of these add-ons, and the danger is that there's too much complexity, that there are too many hidden charges, and that might frustrate certain customers. Certainly it seems that there isn't a lot of price transparency, and that plays into the cruise line company's hands as well in terms of that pricing power I was talking about. If prices are not very transparent, if they're not easily comparable, it's likely they can get away with charging high prices and having lots of additional charges as well, because customers are not so aware of that, and it's very hard to compare to other cruise line companies. And at this early stage, we could ascertain that a company like Cruisecalm is likely to be enacting a premium pricing strategy, and that will be borne out by the evidence that's presented over the rest of this pre-scene.